Welcome to the show live from Media Hub on riotradio.ca. I'm your host, April. I'm a student staff from the DCSA Support Hub. Today we'll be joined with Danae. She's the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Worker from Bethesda House. Bethesda House is a shelter for women and children that are fleeing domestic violence. Bethesda House provides supports to diverse individuals who are dealing with all kinds and types of intimate partner violence and abuse. Danae, thank you for joining us today and speaking on behalf of Bethesda House.
Yeah, thanks for having me today. And on behalf of our agency, thank you for letting us be here. I'm excited and looking forward to answering all your questions and going about how the community and your students can support.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I do want to start just by asking if you can explain what intimate partner violence is.
Yeah, so intimate partner violence is abuse or violence that happens typically between a couple or in a romantic partnership, whereas domestic violence is something that can happen kind of between any dynamic, any relationship at all. So whether that's friend to friend or sibling to sibling or roommate to roommate, it's basically where power imbalances should not exist. But domestic violence is a little bit more of an umbrella term. So with intimate partner violence, that's been declared an epidemic in about 100 Ontario municipalities, with Durham Region being one of them as of April of 2023. They're currently working on it at the provincial level, but between the 4 VAW, Violence Against Women shelters in Durham Region, with Bethesda House in Bowmanville being one of them, they're operating almost exclusively at 100% capacity at all times.
Wow. And how can we determine what constitutes as abuse, with that being said?
Yeah, so again, we're looking to assess whether power imbalances exist within the dynamic of the relationship that shouldn't. So that is going to depend on what kind of relationship we're looking at. So for example, a partner and partner should not be telling each other what they can do or when they can do it, but we can see how that would be different than a parent telling a child, it's bedtime. So we're kind of looking to assess the dynamic of the relationship, but also just looking to see where those power imbalances exist. So we're assessing where there's power and control. And if there's leverage, then that's not an equal relationship, which is what we're looking to assess. So that's kind of how we determine the difference between what would be considered abuse and what wouldn't be.
Right, absolutely. And how can you talk to your friends or family if you suspect that they're in an abusive situation?
So this is a very important question, so I'm going to take a look down at my paper because I don't want to miss anything. But the most important thing to do is ensure that your loved one doesn't feel judged when you're having that conversation. So by taking an empathetic and non-judgmental approach, it's more likely that whoever you're talking to is going to be willing to talk about it. So this is going to mean not critiquing them or their partner, or asking questions that would suggest that their experience is their fault, such as, why don't you just leave? Or saying something along the lines of like, well, if that happened to me, I would just leave. Trying to avoid those judgmental questions. The next priority, if they are willing to open up and share what they're going through, we want to make sure we're believing the survivor. Validate their experience and listen to them. And then taking that approach, we make it about caring for them and their safety and what needs to be prioritized, instead of like a judgmental approach. You can share resources, with Bethesda House being one of them. And again, referencing our website, we've got a virtual toolkit on a guide for concerned family or friends, which addresses the do's and don'ts of navigating these kinds of situations. So that's BethesdaHouse.ca. Once you've had that conversation is when you can offer those resources and help from there. So that could mean recommending your loved one to call our 24/7 crisis line to discuss safety planning, outreach supports, or exploring the possibility of coming into shelter. All of our services are at no cost to the service user and can be done in person, over the phone, with the use of Zoom. And we also have access to translation services if English is not their first language. So we want to make those services as accessible as possible to the community and break down those barriers so that everybody has the same access, because abuse does not discriminate.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that. If someone suspects that they themselves are in an abusive situation, what should they do?
So safety-wise, it's really important that we're establishing a safety plan. So that could be with any local violence against women service provider. I always recommend that it's best that we have that safety plan shared with a family or friend, family member or friend, if that's a possibility, just so that there can be regular safety check-ins. That's what we want to prioritize in these kind of situations. Safety is always number one priority. So our crisis line is staffed 24/7, year round, with a highly skilled crisis counselor who can help with establishing a personalized safety plan. Our website's also a great resource. I've brought that up before. I'll continue to bring it up. There's a lot of good stuff on there. So it's definitely one of the more beneficial resources, because there's aspects in there for survivors and for family members. It doesn't always mean that when we are doing safety planning with a woman that she has to come into shelter or that they have to come into shelter. But, it is one of those things that we can explore. There's also lots of community services we can recommend. So whether that's different agency referrals, if that's the best fit, or working with our own outreach services, which I'll get into in a little bit. So on our website, we do have something that is it's a control checklist. So we can use that as a tool when determining if these are some of the services that would be needed.
Okay. And speaking more about Bethesda House, are you able to talk about which services are provided?
Yeah. So we do have a few different branches. So this is I'll explain in depth kind of the gist of it, but like I mentioned before, our services are free, so they're at no cost to the service user. So for starters, we do have our emergency shelter. So our shelter team consists of full-time case managers, counselors, a housing worker, a child and youth worker, and we do have an in-house trauma therapist. In shelter, the residents have access to a safe and supportive environment where all of their basic needs are met. So that's going to include meals, laundry, life skill support with things like cooking and budgeting. There's childcare that can be provided. We have counseling in both individual and in group settings, safety planning and referrals to other partner agencies, depending on what their needs are. So for some, that's going to range from getting connected with legal support to applying for subsidized daycare or applying for jobs or post-secondary programs. So helping them we can also help them with social housing applications, We prioritize each person's individual needs, and there's definitely no stone unturned when it comes to helping them achieve their goals as they navigate a new beginning after coming out of an abusive situation. For outreach services, we have our housing worker and our outreach counselor. So our housing worker takes on clients who are not in shelter or who have graduated from shelter, and whether them not being in shelters because they have moved on from shelter or because shelter's not an option or something they don't want to do. She can work with community members that way. So she can assist with support navigating various housing options and applications through social housing, market rent, or second stage and transitional. Throughout that process, she supports clients with a transition plan from their current setting into a new environment. If a woman does request support from our housing worker to attend appointments regarding potentially that might mean assistance to court, with a meeting with a police officer or with her lawyer, those are things that our housing worker can also support with. And our outreach counselors next. So our outreach counselor provides both one-to-one and group counseling to women who are living in the community and in shelter, who have completed their services in shelter, who are experiencing violence or abuse related crisis, and coping with the trauma that comes with surviving an abusive situation. So she also helps develop safety plans, identify options, available resources, and facilitate admission to the shelter if the woman so chooses. So sometimes coming into shelter, if that's something that we're exploring, doesn't always look like coming directly into the shelter. That may look like working with our outreach counselor first and determining what the best next steps are, whether that's coming into shelter or whether that's safety planning and going from there. That's kind of what she's there to support with. We also own and operate a second chance thrift store, which is where our residents get to shop at absolutely no charge, and all of the profitable proceeds go directly back into our mission and into our agency. So Second Chance is also open to the public. It's located at 25 King Street West in Bowmanville, from Tuesday to Saturday from 10 to 4. And we've got Mondays that will be opening up in the summer months shortly. So that's a really great program because it has, of course, the supports available to the woman and then the community as well. So whatever is made and profitable comes right back into the agency, and they are accepting donations of clothing and new toys. So those are all things that our women have access to. Then we've also got our child and youth worker program. So our child and youth worker program is pretty comprehensive and it's quite unique. So our child and youth worker is an integral part of our shelter team. She supports mothers, children, and youth who are entering shelter who are under the age of 25, who are entering as dependents. So outside of the shelter, she also runs various groups for the community, some of which include navigating single motherhood after abuse. And she's also in schools. So she's got 2 cool programs she runs with the support of our outreach counselor as well. So our Guys for Change program and our Finding Our Voices. So those are targeted groups for youth in high school who may have adverse life experiences or who have challenges within mainstream systems. So both programs aim to educate the youth about important topics like healthy relationships and internet safety and self-esteem, kind of those foundational building blocks for coming into those young adult years. And our newest Bethesda House program is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Counselor, which is my position. So my role is to engage and manage a client caseload and advocate for our Black, Indigenous, and people of color clients. So this also includes running DEI-related projects, so like specific community groups. I have a really cool opportunity where I get to attend a lot of community events. And then in shelter groups is something I run as well, partnering with similar agencies on workshops. So we've had quite a few social service agencies come in and join us in shelter to run some groups for our women. I also provide trainings on inclusion to our staff team, and I get to connect our clients who are part of minority groups to very specific and targeted referrals for their own supports. So collectively, you can see we've got wraparound services, and we have the privilege of providing those to the community. It's definitely never a one-size-fits-all action plan, and we recognize that. So that's kind of why we've got such a diverse range of services.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's so glad to hear about all those services, and they're really important to have. So I think just having that knowledge is really great. So thank you. I think this might be our last question. What can our students and community do to be supporting Bethesda House?
Yeah, of course. So for students specifically, we offer student placement year-round for all semesters that happen throughout the year, including summer. And we work with the student schedule. So because our shelter does operate 24/7, we've got some placement students who only weekends work for them, and we can make that happen, or only evenings work for them, and we can make that happen. But many of our placement students do come from programs like the social service worker or the child and youth program, gender studies, Bachelor of Social Work, those kinds of programs, and so on. So our placement students definitely get to gain a lot of hands-on experience in shelter. They get to do almost everything that our staff get to do, but we definitely encourage our students to participate in things like running groups for our shelter clients or practicing, one-to-one counseling sessions while they have a staff member counselor with them present. So it's kind of like a dual role where the students get a little bit of hands-on experience doing some counseling as well. But there's lots of opportunities for student placements. Another way to support Bethesda House is by volunteering. We're very grateful to have the team of volunteers that we do, and the work that they do is an integral part of our services. So our Second Chance thrift store that I mentioned earlier is run exclusively by volunteers. And of course, it wouldn't operate without them. Similarly, we have various community events and fundraisers where every set of hands makes a difference. There's lots of unique volunteer options for students and can be tailored to what their program of study is. So, while I did mention we've got a lot of SSW and child and youth work students, a really cool part of working for an agency that's got so many different branches is that we can utilize various major skills in marketing, fundraising, strategic statistic and data management, things like that. So of course, talking about abuse, that would be the next way we can support in general. So there's unfortunately sometimes a stigma associated with abusive relationships, and breaking the silence definitely helps destigmatize it. So talk with your friends, your siblings, your colleagues about this province-wide epidemic. There's such power in numbers, and the acknowledgement of what's happening in real time really gets an opportunity to bring awareness to the issue, but it also helps survivors know that there are resources available and that they're not alone. And, we have the community supports that can help them move on to the next step. I think coming out of abusive relationships, oftentimes it can feel like there's, maybe nowhere to turn to, or you feel very alone or isolated. But the reality is we have a very strong community when it comes to supporting survivors. So the resources are there. But yeah, like I said, we've got a 24/7 crisis line, and that's operated every single day of the year. So that's definitely a great resource for folks who are coming out of it. But that would be my recommendation.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And I do want to mention that I had the opportunity of being one of the student placements at Bethesda. And it was such a great opportunity. I got to learn so much, and got to start spreading that awareness and everything I learned there. And I can now put other places and bring to my current position at the Support Hub, which I also did want to mention. At the Support Hub at the Durham College Student Association, we offer support and resources for students who may be dealing with domestic violence situation. If you were looking to email, you can at dcsa.supporthub@durhamcollege.ca, and we're available on campus from Mondays to Fridays as well. So if you're in any situation or you know someone who is, you're welcome to stop by and come and see us, and we can help you out. Okay. So Danae, I just wanted to thank you so much for being here today, and just for giving us all this knowledge. I think that's super important. Would you be willing to let us know where the audience can find the Bethesda House on social media?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for having us.
Of course.
Like I said, on behalf of our agency, thank you. But we're on socials, so you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, LinkedIn, just Bethesda House. And we're located in Bowmanville, and then our website is bethesdahouse.ca.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Of course.
And don't forget that you can follow us on social media at DCSA Media Hub. And you can find today's shows and more of the episodes on riotradio.ca.